Welcome to the Middle East roundtable of the Global UAE Energy Forum, where we're going to use this stage to host our speakers and try and ask a critical question. A net zero challenge, what is next in 2021? The historical epicenter of fossil fuels has made huge strides to pioneer low carbon technologies and policies in the last 10 years especially, including several world-breaking renewable projects. But this journey has really only just started. And as the region catches up, the global speedometer is only increasing. And so really it is a case of pedal to the metal. What is an excellent lineup of speakers today. Thank you all very much for joining us. Will hopefully get us a little bit closer to understanding what net zero will look like in the Middle East, if indeed it's even on the cards. It's a lot to squeeze into 45 minutes, but we're going to try. So please may we kick off with Christophe Sassolas, President Total E&P UAE, and also the Total Country Chair of the UAE. Christophe, welcome, and a few thoughts, please.
Hi, good morning. Thank you, Michelle. So we can finally see your face. We were seeing half of your computer and half your face. So thanks for inviting me. I'm happy to be with the crowd here, with Hind, Yusuf, Karl, and Waleed. Very happy to be here. So yeah, achieving net zero is possibly the greatest challenge that humanity has to face today. And we in the energy industry are clearly at the heart of it. So in Total, we translate that into a very simple word. We say that we need to provide more energy with less emission. And this concerns every actors, consumers, industry, government, regulators. And for me, there's two overarching reasons why we need to act now. One is linked to what customers want, and the second is regulations. Customers today, they value CO2 intensity. And to give you only one example, if I take last year, there's been a dozen of LNG cargoes being sold in Asia on a net zero basis, including actually some cargo leaving from at least one cargo leaving from Abu Dhabi. And amazingly, actually, it's the actors that are netting zero are not necessarily the producer. So there's a whole business developing here. The second, of course, is regulation. It's very fragmented today, emission trading schemes, regulation, very nationwide. But if there's something we know in the energy industry is our lead time. When we change something, it takes 5, 6, 10 years. And so we have to anticipate future regulations. And when you look at the ambitions set by the European Union, by China, if you look in terms of net zero, if you look at what India is saying in terms of solar, it's not a net zero, but it's definitely a step toward net zero. You can see regulations coming in and the pricing of CO2 being there. So the question of this forum, if I understand, is what do we need to do now in 2021? And without preempting our discussion, I personally see four main subjects we need to focus. One, of course, is linked to deploying the technology bricks. The good news is that most of the technology is there. It's neither been assembled together or it hasn't been brought up to scale, think of electrolyzer, thing like that. And clearly there's things about electrification of processes, about cheaper capture of CO2 through various means, about demand management, about photovoltaic technology, about even artificial intelligence driven process. So that's the first axis, is technology brick. The second one, being myself a producer of energy in a producing region, is to act on what we can control, and which is so-called scope 1 and 2. And there it's amazing if we start having our operational culture and our operational excellence focusing on CO2 emission. And I'll give you one very good example. When you restart a plant, whatever the plant is, power, gas, oil, and if you have your people focusing on restarting with the lowest emission rather than restarting with the quickest possible, you can divide by 2 or 3 your emission. And that's one of the things we can control. The third axis, of course, is diversification of energy resources. We are clearly blessed in the Middle East with what I call the second natural resources, which is sun and space. Space is as important as sun, because you have countries that have space that are overcrowded and they can't get project on the ground. But here we have sun and space. And so we really need to, we've already done that, but really we need to diversify. And it's diversification. I know people try to conclude that it's the end of oil and gas. It is not. We will need a mix. And to give an example, in total, today we produce around 55% of oil, 40% of gas, and 5% of electrons of power. And our vision for even in 10 years, in 2030, is to have 35% of oil. So our growth will not come from the oil. 50% of gas, because we will need more gas. And we can comment on the latest surge in gas demand in Asia over the last few weeks. And 50% of electricity, because we need to diversify that. And finally, and I'll end up, I'm a bit long, the fourth brick that I see, or the fourth axis for next year, is clearly regulations. Because as soon as you start selling or valuing net zero, you need to have a recognition of what is net zero. You have to have an industry standards on how you compute emission, how you net them, and you have to have a way to price it in through regulation or through the market in a way, and that's definitely something that's been lacking.
And all of which requires transparency, of course, and all of which are very detailed, and we'll delve into those more in a moment. If I'd like to welcome Yusuf Al-Ali, the Executive Director of Masdar Energy. Yusuf, thank you as well very much for joining us. What are your thoughts, please?
Thank you, Michelle. I'll start with this statement. UAE is committed for a sustainable future, not only for the UAE, but it's for the commitment is for the entire world. So in December, we submitted our second nationally determined contribution report to the United Nations Convention on Climate Change. So this report shows that our emission will be reduced by 2030 by almost 23% compared with our business as usual for 2030. This is a huge, important message that we are passing. We are committed, we are pushing forward, we are trying our best to reduce, to change our business as usual by reducing carbon. How we are going to achieve this reduction in carbon? This is going to be achieved by relying more on renewable energy, by adapting other technologies when it comes to waste management, by increasing our efficiency in consumption, by expanding further our carbon capture and storage ability. So we have combined actions that will allow us, inshallah, to reduce our carbon footprint. When it comes, when we speak about UAE, I also like to speak about my company, Masdar. So Masdar today exists in more than 30 countries around the world. We were able to build huge capacities. Today, we are more than 10 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity. We're providing electricity to more than 3 million people all around the world. Masdar is only about clean energy. So when we speak about net zero, I think, first of all, net zero has different definitions for different people, depends where you are on the earth. So something that we have to recognize, we have more than 800 million of people who lack access to electricity. So these people, their priorities are different. So today we have the luxury here to talk about net zero, while others are not able to get electricity. So the priorities can differ between nation to nation. So what I want to say, I think how people perceive net zero will be different between nation to nation, between priorities to priorities. Here, as a country and as a company, we are committed to expanding renewable energy. We are committed to reducing our carbon footprint, and this is demonstrated in the report that we submitted to the United Nations. Following the pandemic, so I'm very optimistic. 2021 will be associated with hopefully a sustainable green recovery for our economy. We've seen this is happening. We've seen governments taking more commitment post the pandemic in the UK, in Indonesia, and Masdar exists in these markets and will be part of this green recovery and carbon reduction in these countries.
And like you say, so much of it is about just identifying, exactly as Christophe just mentioned as well, is identifying what net zero is, what it means to a country and what it means to a region, something we can get into as well. Please may I bring in Karl, Feilder, CEO, founder and chairman of Neutral Fuels.
Thank you very much. It's really kind of you to invite me along. especially as I suspect I'm the only net zero company here. I don't need to spend the next 10 years debating what net zero means. All of our scope 1, scope 2 and scope 3 emissions are offset, and our product that we produce is very, very low carbon because it's made out of waste materials. Anyway, we make biofuel in 4 factories around the region. We sell it to businesses that want to reduce their carbon emissions still further. We're very lucky last year that our largest customer last year was ADNOC. They bought our fuel in order to be able to do their internal transportation at a lower carbon footprint. And I think that that's a fantastic example to the region of how the oil and gas industry can actually make significant differences to the way that their oil and gas works for their own scope 1 emissions. If they can use alternative fuels and alternative energy and renewable energy for their scope 1 emissions, then this will have an impact on their overall carbon footprint. I also don't understand why everybody is so slow to get to a net zero. I was very privileged to run DHL's global climate change program for 3 years. And in 2006, we measured accurately the carbon footprint of an organization that existed in every country in the world with 200,000 vehicles and 423 aircraft. And we were able to come up with a strategy to plan how to reduce that carbon footprint. Because we could accurately measure it, if we wanted to, then we could have accurately offset it all. And that's just a question of money. It's about buying the necessary offsets, whether they be planting trees that are in a proper program, binding CERS, binding carbon credits, EU ETS, whatever it is, those programs exist. And I think the one thing that we must have learned from last year is that the future isn't going to be the way it was in the past. The future ain't what it used to be. It has to be different. Post-COVID, we have to come through this with a totally different way of looking at the world.
Thank you. Next up, Waleed Suraih, the lead energy specialist and GCC infrastructure program leader at the World Bank. Waleed, please can you share some thoughts?
Sure, thanks, Michelle, and it's a pleasure to be with this distinguished panel. I think the 2021 will be a year of understanding the uncertainties and managing them. I think one of the core focus areas for governments globally and the region, which is the vaccinations rollout and making sure the citizens are safe, and then how to move from there towards opening the economy gradually. The other point I wanted also to highlight, I think there is no one size fits all. I think the region requires or needs new breed of climate action policies that look into the future in a way that ensure the resilience when it comes to implementing them and their impact going forward. It's very important also to highlight that there are some great emerging new and bold initiatives happening in the region. We see it in the UAE, we see it in Saudi Arabia, where some of these initiatives will hopefully create a good domino effect for others to follow, particularly those countries that are pretty much lagging behind currently. The other point I wanted to highlight is that if we look into the pipeline of investments now, in power sector, mainly power generation, it's mostly dominated by renewables. And that has never happened in the past. The question is how to take it from the current state to a level that matches the ambitions and also the need for addressing the reduction in emissions in the region.
The scalability of this is a huge issue. Last but certainly not least, please may I welcome Hind Mutawa, Chief Information Officer of Innovation and Director of Productivity and Demand Side Management at the Department of Ministry and Energy for the Ministry and Infrastructure in the UAE. Hind, please may I have some thoughts? What do you think of the key question?
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. The fact is that the Middle East currently is facing many uncertainties, and that the oil price outlook is highly uncertain with all the COVID circumstances that you're facing, the related effects, and transport and hospitality, tourism, and logistics, which was contributing to the diversifying the economy alongside the fossil fuels GC country, which means it's a double whammy effect. So recovering from the COVID is also uncertain as we are entering 2021. We can see still there are economies around the world are still striving through. So it depends on the COVID waves, how it reoccur and how fast the vaccine will reach out everyone. But the question remains will 2021 be a strong year of recovery? The answer is still also uncertain. So countries will have to adjust not only in terms of fiscal policy, but also in terms of energy policy, which are what are they going to do in terms of energy transition to low carbon economy and net zero, which is already taking place to face the climate change risk that are increasing. So talking about the power sector, it's the front and center of efforts to reduce emissions. UAE had already taken proactive efforts in that regard. The UAE energy strategy, for instance, 2050 aims to increase the contribution of clean energy to 25 to 50% by 2050 and reduce the carbon footprint of the power generation to 70%. That strategy also sets the firm commitment to accelerate efforts to deliver access to stable and affordable and sustainable energy supply for all, and so safeguard the social and environment sustainability by improving energy efficiency by 40%. So the vision does not exclude the UAE oil and gas sector, which is set to grow and continue to support increasing global demand. Nonetheless, it sets ambitious targets to support the sustainable energy transition. And as UAE prepares for the next 50, as part of its 2071 agenda, the oil and gas sector is committed to a low carbon future to achieve our shared goals of sustainable energy transition, support growing energy demand. Oil and gas, in particular natural gas, will remain an essential part of the energy mix. So
I think fossil fuels remain a very critical part of the overall energy system. And Christophe, if I may loop back to you, please, it's something you touched on as well about how fuel operators need to evolve and they need to develop, because of course fossil fuels are still going to count by most forecasts and most scenarios about around a third of overall production by mid-century. It's certainly not going anywhere, and that's critical for energy security. What steps do you think, Christophe, that fossil fuel operators can take in 2021 to start making more progress down Scope 1, Scope 2, but also Scope 3? The devil is in the details, and Scope 3 is just as important, though of course much harder.
Yeah, Scope 3, of course, is as important as Scope 1 and Scope 2. Of course, as you consume energy in the consuming countries, Scope 3 will need help from regulation, because at the end, we can try to nudge our customers, but they ultimately decide what energy they will consume, whether it's oil, whether it's gas, whether it's renewable. So it's I agree with you. One of the things we can really act upon is Scope 1 and 2. And I will repeat a bit what I said at the beginning. Of course, there's controlling what we can do. We are praised and blessed in the Middle East, and especially in Abu Dhabi, the intensity of the CO2 intensity per barrel in Abu Dhabi is 2 to 5 kilo of CO2 per barrel, which is way below the world average, or even in my company, the average of the company worldwide. So that's one of the reasons actually we're so active in the Middle East, is that because we have this vision that in a few years this would be highly valued, and we need to at least let customers know of that CO2 intensity. That's the first step. And the second, of course, is even if you're at 5 or 2 or 4, you can improve. As I said, electrification of processes you still have a lot of processes in oil and gas that are not electrified, so still emit a lot of CO2, especially with the steps that the UAE has taken for lowering the CO2 intensity of the grid with Masdar work on the photovoltaic and with the nuclear plant. And it's really a lot of brick of technology, lowering the cost of capture. The cost of capture today, when you look at CCUS, it's still 60-65% of the cost of the storage, and that's really where most of the R&D and the brick should go to. It's still a complicated business to capture CO2 in a scaled economic way, and that's what we're working on, and that's what a lot of the producing actors are working on.
Because even there's a ramp up in CCS now in terms of planned projects or even projects that are being built, and it still leaves us far, far beyond what would be needed as per projections to make it an effective tool to hit decarbonisation by mid-century, not just in the Middle East, but worldwide. Yusuf, if we could just go back to the net zero side of things, do you think that other countries globally and their commitments to net zero, China, Japan, UK, EU, South Korea, and some others as well that are looking, potentially the US in a couple of weeks, we'll see. But do you think that that will have an impact on countries in the Middle East to declare net zero targets specifically? In terms of momentum, how do you think that will play out? We have national visions, obviously, and a lot of companies have very ambitious targets, but as part of that broader picture, do you think the net zero bandwagon, essentially, the Middle East will join it?
Again, Michelle, we go back to the definition of net zero and priorities for each nation. I think UAE is very committed when it comes to reducing carbon footprint locally and globally. We are in the lead when it comes to the deployment of many technology. So we see in UAE a diverse of clean energy technology. We've seen the solar technology with batteries. We've seen the CSP technology. We've seen the deployment of waste to energy project, the first of its kind in this region. We've seen the deployment and operation of carbon capture project here in Abu Dhabi, 800,000 tons of CO2. This is happening since long time. And also UAE today, UAE today with Masdar and other partners, we are working hard with our international partners also to be in the lead when it comes to blue and green hydrogen production. On top of this, we are also exporting knowledge and development and technologies to other countries in the world. So we are
just on that point, if I may interrupt. Masdar has been doing so much work when it comes to these international partnerships on many different scopes, from finance to technology, as you touched upon as well. How critical do you think that will be this year? Do you think we'll see an acceleration again of partnerships in 2021 for decarbonisation?
As a company, since we start 15 years, the key partnerships we had from the beginning helped us really to develop many projects and to get the experience and the knowledge. So partnership that we had in Total when we decided to build the first CSP plant in the region, other partnerships that we had in the world helped us to do all these projects. Of course, partnerships with companies and countries has experience will help us to get more knowledge and will help us to implement practices and technologies that can reduce carbon footprint. And you never know, depends on the definition of net carbon. Maybe nations will, of course, will use these technologies, these learnings to achieve net carbon if they decide to go for net zero.
Net zero. Hind, how valuable do you feel that the global partnerships are?
As I mentioned, it's key for our.
Oh, sorry, for Hind. I was asking for Hind.
Hind, please go ahead.
Yes, sure. Thank you. Yeah, definitely the partnership is part of the is part of this all the endeavors and efforts that we're going through. And with regard to the impact that you just mentioned, which is part of also of the partnership, for example, we are now listening to the International Dialogue on Hydrogen. We've seen the conversation on net zero is putting the topics such as hydrogen and CCUS in the spotlight. There's growing interest for these technologies to address the hard-to-abate sectors such as industry and transport. So here in the Middle East, and particularly the UAE, has a unique position. The scale-up of CCUS and the UAE will enhance the knowledge and experience towards the technology and help improve the learning rates and therefore drive down the cost of CCUS implementation, hopefully. And this expertise will when combined with the traditional hydrogen production, can enable, or let's say potentially will enable UAE to become a front runner in blue hydrogen. The UAE has been producing and consuming hydrogen as part of their refinery operations. The production of hydrogen from fossil fuels in our region is currently the most competitive, around $1.5 per kg. Therefore, in our view, production from hydrocarbon presents an important stepping stone, starting from gray hydrogen, transitioning to blue and green. Similarly, to the levelized cost of hydrogen production from the electrolyzer technology, are benefiting from the reduction in cost of the renewable energy. So UAE is rich with hydrocarbons, especially the natural gas, which can be a source for blue hydrogen. So we need to invest probably in that technology development of hydrogen and innovation to cut down the cost. And we are ready for that. We have the refineries that is producing hydrogen. We have the gas infrastructure. We have the LNG infrastructure. We gotta think how to export the hydrogen, not probably as a native hydrogen, but probably as a decarbonized steel or ammonia or other products. So we do have the know-how.
Into the whole idea of partnerships and developing that market. So those partnerships are there. Karl, might bring you in on the technology and innovation side, your bread and butter, really. What would you say are the top 3 areas that the Middle East, not just the UAE, but the Middle East should focus on in 2021?
One of the things that we're actively working with the UAE government on at the moment is the fact that a lot of the waste resources which could be used in low carbon alternative energy streams are being exported from the Middle East into other economies. The European Union is the largest buyer of waste cooking oil, for example, in the world. Waste paper is being shipped out of our country. We're losing lots of waste materials that we are perfectly capable of recycling in our own countries. And when you do a net carbon calculation, it doesn't make any sense to produce a green fuel in Europe if the raw materials have been shipped halfway around the world, and it's perfectly possible to produce that green fuel in the same country where the raw materials exist. And indeed, this change in the way that the world works, the raw materials are present in the same country as the processing facility is present in the same country as the consumer of the fuel, then there's no more need to move this stuff around the planet. And when you take out, you disintermediate those supply chains, you lose a lot of the inefficiencies in that system, which means that, as we've proved over the last 10 years, you can very profitably produce these alternative energy streams without government subsidy. So I don't need carbon credits in order that I can sell my product. I just need a more efficient setup and a more efficient supply chain. So I think that there will be these recognitions occurring, particularly as organizations such as ours expand regionally and show that the knowledge that we've built here in the UAE over the last 10 years can be shared with our friends around the region, and that we can show them how to make use of their own waste streams to produce extremely low carbon alternatives to classic fuels.
So talking about the localization and the greening of the supply chain, and also you touched on earlier about DHL in 2006 and essentially had the whole company and its global operations mapped out. With that in mind, and obviously that brings to eye a very loud ticking clock, really. What can the Middle East do to essentially, or Middle Eastern countries, UAE, if you'd like to focus on one, do to accelerate progress this year? Or do you have to pick two areas, what would you highlight?
Well, the first thing, and to come back to everybody's comment about net zero, that it depends what you mean.
Well, let's say decarbonisation by mid-century.
Okay, well, the thing that I wanted to point out that I love about net zero is it puts a numeric value on the target. And once you have a numeric value on a target, you realize you need to have a numeric value for all of the inputs. And the one thing that's been lacking to organizations, apart from DHL and some of the other big companies, is this need to measure. We actually need to have a measurement system that measures at the same frequency as the actions to mitigate those impacts. So to put that into broad terms, writing an annual report that tells you what your global carbon footprint is almost useless. Having a management system in place that measures it on a weekly or daily basis and provides you with abilities to tweak it and see the actions the next day, that's what's necessary. So I think the first thing that people need to do is to realize that having a numeric target means a numeric management system, and the time increments of that need to be not an annual report to make the shareholders happy. It needs to be a report that's on a minute by minute basis to actually show you where inefficiencies are And that will save money. So my message for the last 13 years has been exactly the same. Reducing carbon intensity improves EBITDA. So why the dickens do we need any more motivation than that? As business leaders, we know that we want to make more profits. So if we can make more profits by behaving more efficiently, and we can use carbon as a numeric metric to get us there, then it all adds up.
Waleed, everything loops back to money, just as Karl's touching on as well. What do you think is needed in 2021 to create a robust green finance ecosystem in the Middle East? We're seeing green bond market globally is growing substantially. I think it hit around $260 billion in 2019, according to Climate Bond. That's one part of the ecosystem. What can the Middle East do to increase its green ecosystem this year? Because these ideas are all nothing if they don't have cash behind them.
I have to give you a different answer from the one that you would like, I think.
Oh, sorry, that question was for Waleed. I'd like to, I'll loop back to you, Karl. Waleed, are you with us?
Sure, yeah, thanks.
But I'm intrigued, Karl, I'll come back.
I very much like what Karl, the practical way of putting things, and that's, I think, what matters most. I would like to highlight 2 or 3 things. The first one, I want to remind everyone that there are some energy sector fundamentals that have to be addressed as soon as possible. And what I mean by that is mainly energy pricing. Subsidies are hindering the growth and the financials of those utilities and others in the sector. And this has an impact on the attractiveness for very creative, innovative financing solutions like green bonds and others. We have seen some good examples in the past few months in the region where some utilities have issued green bonds. However, I think there is a need for a proper alignment between the corporate priorities and the financial markets objectives. And that would require government to create the needed ecosystem in terms of policies, as well as incentives to move the sector forward when it comes to green financing. I think that the appetite is there. The challenge is that clarity and transparency and a kind of clear commitment on the way forward when it comes to be it net zero or decarbonization, but what I would call it low emission or low carbon transition in the sector. I think the region could become a leader in this area, considering the resources as well as the potential that is already in place. Several governments have initiated bold visions in the region. The pathways towards those or achieving the goals of those visions would vary, but I think there is a great overlap considering the similarities in different countries, and this creates also some good synergies when it comes to financing as well.
And that also feeds into the region's bid to have more cross-border energy infrastructure, the talk of a power grid and the gas and maybe perhaps LNG storage as well on the coast. So it all feeds into this more aligned cohesiveness. If we can bring up our first survey question, please. This is going to be, I think it's going to be a pretty obvious answer from today. More and more major economies are signing up to net zero targets amid this pressure. Perhaps it's not pressure. Arab Gulf nations will announce net zero goals this year. Yes or no? Can we see the answers, please? I don't think it's going to have taken anyone very long to select. Has everyone voted? Whenever the answer is ready, then we'll have a look at that. I think we can probably all have a pretty good guess at what that answer is going to be, as the idea of net zero is still on the what it means. And this is obviously a global conversation in terms of what net zero means. Very interesting. We're seeing it everywhere. You know, it's all very well having these blueprints, and China, the world's second largest economy and biggest energy consumers, saying they'll go net zero, but how is that going to actually work on a tangible basis? I'm surprised to see it's 50-50. I thought we were going to be a bit misaligned. Christophe, may I ask, what did you go with?
Well, maybe I'll say the same thing then, Karl. I'm not sure you will get the answer you were expected. You know, what matters to me, and that's where I concur with Karl, is not necessarily the ambitions. Setting an ambition as 50 years, it's good, it's set a target, but what matters is the action we're taking now. If I'm a bit cynical, I would say that I don't manage a company by setting an ambition in 30 years. I set target at a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, and I act upon that. And as I said, the Middle East being both supplying the world and a demand by itself. If you look at the demand in most of the countries, there's been significant step to lower the CO2 emission. And the project we had with Masdar was one example, but what Hind said about the CO2 intensity of the power system in the UAE. And for the supply side, the consumers will demand that. So whether you set a net zero or not, you will have to act upon what you're selling to your consumer. So the question is very relevant, but I'm not sure it actually matters in reality. So
I guess it's more the political posturing, isn't it? It's the political posturing that we are making this commitment, and then it's on the business side, always looking to policymakers, stroke government, to get some kind of cohesive goalposts to hit between. And then this is supposed to be a rough indication in that direction. But yes, there's an argument that there's a political peacocking within that picture as well. Karl, to loop back to you on what we didn't expect to hear, would you like to share it?
Yes, unfortunately for everybody, I guess. But the answer to the question of what does the Middle East need? It needs courage. It needs courage to do the things that it knows are right. We know what the right answer is here. And I would say that since 1992, when we had the Rio Earth Summit and we declared a commitment as governments to reduce the CO2 levels around the world, and since then we've gone up by 60%. I think government intervention is actually one of the worst things that can happen in this. 71% of carbon emissions since 1988 came from 100 companies, not governments. DHL's carbon footprint in 2006, DHL, one company, was the same as 46 countries added together. We need to get companies engaged in this. And as Christophe has already said, our consumers are demanding this. We don't need complicated structures from governments. We don't need more regulation. We just need to do what's right. We need to do what we're courageously charged to do when we run our businesses, to do the best thing, not just for our shareholders, but also for our customers. That's
and as I say, it pays off financially anyway.
It works. If it improves EBITDA and improves shareholder return, and it gives you a product that your customers are happier with, why wouldn't you do it?
On that note, can we have the second survey question up, please? This links to hydrogen, which is something Hind was talking about in terms of creating an ecosystem, and then in the longer term, becoming an exporter and leveraging those partnerships. So Hind, I'll ask you your views on the answer when they come through. So the question is, if it acts quickly, the Middle East can become an influential global hub for a hydrogen economy by 2025. It's 4 years away, it's very short. What are your thoughts? Quick yes or no? And then Emma, as soon as the answers are in, we can show them. 4 years, if we go back 4 years, it's only really when the Paris Agreement was gaining its feet. Quite a lot's happened in that time, but the establishment of an entirely new market economy on a global basis, I'm not sure. So shall we see what the answers are? Yes, if it acts quickly, fantastic. 65% say it is viable in the next 4 years. Hind, what do you think?
Yeah, so as I said, I mean, UAE is, no, it's not like the final position, but it's still, the hydrogen, it's still probably, let's say it's too early to say what will happen, but no one knows what will happen in the future. But what we know is that we do have a lot of potential of hydrogen in UAE. Looking at the cost, looking at the supply side, probably there are challenges definitely on the transport and others, but we look into the potential, like the life cost of hydrogen, production of electrolyzer technology. Like a Dhafra project, we have the 2 gigawatt recently. The LCOE reached to 1.35 cents per kilowatt hour, and the CSP that reached to 7.3. So these are all the potentials, right? And definitely we can't forget what ADNOC's Riyadh CCUS plant, which is the first fully commercial CO2 capture from the iron and steel industry. You can see also the demand across the world. You can see Japan, Netherlands, and US. They are betting on hydrogen to play a central role, for instance. So we're seeing a hydrogen way of their life, but probably they cannot produce it all by themselves. So
well, Europe is one of those. Europe is looking to the Middle East, maybe as a major import. Yeah.
That's right. So probably they'll import it from other countries, and definitely the bottom line is the cost. Today, the green hydrogen is 4 times costly the blue hydrogen, or 8 times the brown. This can unfold economic opportunities from our oil and gas assets. We stand for trying everything possible that makes sense economically and technology in the toolkit.
But that doesn't mean wrecking the economies at the same time, of course. It's got to pay off both sides. Yusuf, yes. What was your view on the survey results for hydrogen?
I think it's clear, we are coming from the oil and gas background. We are an energy economy. We are also very successful when it comes to the development of renewable energy. As mentioned by Engineer Hind, we achieved the lowest price ever, 1.3 cents. It's much lower than conventional based electricity. All these aspects together will allow us also to produce hydrogen in a very competitive manner, whether it is green hydrogen or blue hydrogen. We'll be able to produce it in a very competitive manner. We are one of the first who started studying in details and spending capital on hydrogen since 2008. Masdar embarked on a hydrogen project, mega scale hydrogen project. And I think we have everything now getting aligned in order for major hydrogen projects to come in the country, inshallah.
And Waleed, considering the global economy, and we're arguably in the worst economic state since the global depression, the Great Depression, do you see this being viable financially in the next 4 years from a financial perspective? In terms of the infrastructure required, policy and so far aside, just the cost of infrastructure and so on?
You mean on the hydrogen?
Yes, yeah.
I think I'll put it this way. On the blue hydrogen, as long as there is a clear pathway on the CCS, on the carbon capture and the utilization, I think that will create a good transition pathway. So even on the cost side, and it is actually attractive as long as the demand is increasing. I think on the green hydrogen, it is still too early. There are some initiatives in different parts of the region. And the good news is that governments did not go into policies and regulations first. They in fact went into piloting large scale projects to really understand and get hold of what it means for them. And that gives, I think, a bottom-up approach rather than a top-down approach where governments lay the foundation based on actual experience, and that is needed. And that will eventually, on the green hydrogen side, will eventually create the momentum on the financing side. But back on I strongly believe that hydrogen will play a major role in the region, considering the potential both in the hydrocarbons as well as in the renewable side, or the green hydrogen side, and they will eventually converge. And I'm hoping that the alignment starts as early as possible without the only focus on one area without the other. And I think the region is taking that approach, both the blue and the green together.
Thank you very much. Christophe, as we're nearing the end and as our host, would you like to have a few final words to round us up?
Well, first of all, to thank everybody. I think that's a lively discussion, and it's nice to see different approach from different actors who are all playing a role in there. And if I have one word, I think our discussion exemplified the fact that it's true partnership. Because we cannot meet that challenge if we don't engage with clients, with people who transport, with regulators, with financing bodies, with companies of different scales, because the solution is not one. Hydrogen, the discussion on hydrogen is interesting, but hydrogen is not a silver bullet. That's my conviction. It's a brick that can help and solve certain things, certain storage elements, certain mobility elements. But it's really partner with the entire industry sorry, that's the timing up, so I should hand up. Sorry, Michelle. Thank you. You're muted, Michelle.
Please finish your comments. We've got a...
No, but that's it. That was my main comment. Partnership.
I think that, yeah, absolutely. We've had partnerships, the need to define net zero via improving the measuring as well, the need for real-time measuring, transparency, need to leverage tech as well. That there is a huge amount of opportunity, and it's overall, I think this has been an optimistic tone to what's next in the decarbonisation of the Middle East. So thank you very, very much to each of our speakers. We appreciate it, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.